All right, here we are. Happy Friday, everybody.
TGIF.
TGIF. Welcome to the Sustainability Happy Hour, brought to you by the School of Global Environmental Sustainability at Colorado State University. My name is Micah Bennett. I'm the communications specialist here at SoGES, and this is my partner.
Pat Keys, lead scientist at SoGES. So Micah, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I sort of feel like you need to have like a pithier title. Like you are the communications specialist, but it would be great if we had like, I don't know, comms czar or something like that. Like something, I don't know. I'm not in charge of those things.
We'll think on that. We'll think about
it. We'll think about it. We should mention who our guest is today.
Yeah, we should. Tell me.
So our guest today is Professor Lynn Badia of the English department at Colorado State University. She is interested in a lot of things, including understanding the aesthetics of the Anthropocene, among other things. I don't really know what that means, and so we're going to learn a lot about what that means. We're going to find out today. But she also teaches a class on climate fiction. She's developed a ton of interesting stuff around the energy sector and how it intersects with the humanities. So it's going to be a great conversation today. But we've got a couple news items we want to cover first, right?
Well, and before we do that, Pat, you're forgetting one of the most important things.
Oh my God, I forgot all about it.
I know you did. I know.
Okay.
You did. Fun facts.
You take over the screen for a second. I got to close my door.
Okay. Well, everybody, my fun fact relates to the weather that we're about to have. I hope you're all ready for Snowmageddon. I was supposed to run a 5K this weekend, which is like pretty big. I am not a runner.
You mean like an official 5K?
Yeah, I was gonna run the Lucky Brew 5K in Windsor. It's their like St. Patrick's Day 5K.
Okay.
And it's gonna be great. I've been training. I've been running.
Wow.
And thank goodness it got canceled because I do not want to run in 2 feet of snow. I don't want to.
I'm actually surprised. It's Fort Collins. I'm surprised they didn't just say, forget it, we're going.
It's funny. They sent out one email like the day sort of the forecast came out. They're like, no, we're not canceling it. Run, rain or shine. And then about 3 hours later, they canceled it.
Oh man.
It's not canceled. It's been rescheduled. So I just am going to run it next week instead.
Okay, well that's good. I'm glad that you don't have to give up entirely on your dream of running a 5K. But I'm sorry that you have to run the 5K. I feel like I have to say, I'm glad that you get to do it, but also I'm sorry that you have to do it.
I know. I have two minds about it.
Yeah.
What's your fun fact, Pat?
Oh God, I knew we were gonna get there. Okay,
up. Let's go.
Something. Okay, so a fun fact is that I've been working on a project, and I've actually been able to work with my older brother, who is not a scientist or anything like that, but he's an artist on the side, and so he's been able to. I've been doing some writing, and he's been creating some art for the project, and that's been a lot of fun. That's like a totally just like side note, personal fun fact, but it's been fun to have a reason to hang out with my brother, who lives in Oregon, so like I never see him. So it's been fun to work on this, and it happens to be climate fiction, so I might bring it up later. But awesome. Yeah, is that okay? Is that an okay fun fact?
I'm not the fun fact judge. There's no judgment here.
You kind of are. I feel like you kind of are.
Because I'm so fun.
Well, okay, because you're so fun. That's fair. Okay, but we should talk about the news, and then we'll go to our guest, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me about the news.
So this week we're gonna cover something that's a little bit monumental. Hold on a second. I gotta make sure I add this instead of remove it. How am I gonna do this? Let's see if I do that. All right, it worked. Okay. So today we're talking about how the Senate has advanced confirmation of a candidate, the pick, the Biden administration pick for the Secretary of the Interior, for the Department of the Interior, and that's Deb Holland. And so this is a big deal for lots of reasons. For one, she happens to be a sort of champion of climate issues as well as Native American issues, but perhaps more historically, she will be the first Native American ever to serve in a cabinet level position, which is honestly, I'm actually surprised by that stat. I was sort of surprised that this is the first time, but here we are. but it's just really, so to me, it's really, it signals, politics aside, it signals a big shift toward a certain set of policies around climate change, around sort of acknowledging the seriousness of the problem. Deb Holland has a track record of pursuing sort of progressive policies around climate change, climate action, that sort of thing. And so that's a good signal that there might be somebody in that position, but it should not be diminished that it is the first Native American, a woman, in this position as well. All of this, so that intersectional identity that she brings to the position will also be historic. And so that was, it hasn't happened. So she hasn't been confirmed officially yet, but she was voted out of committee, and it's sort of, it's not a foregone conclusion, but it's very likely that she will be confirmed. And so that's a pretty big deal, especially sort of as this administration, Biden administration, as well as Congress in general, is gearing up to try and pass more aggressive climate legislation moving forward. So that's a big deal. Also, kind of at the end of this article in particular, it mentions the EPA administrator was approved. And so that's important, right? To have a functioning EPA. And let's see, I can't remember. Michael Reagan, he used to serve, he formerly served in North Carolina's Department of Environmental Quality. So anyway, check this out.
Yeah,
this is an exciting, what's that?
I was just going to say, for everyone watching, we'll put the link to this news article in our show notes. Yes. And anything else that we talk about today, we'll get linked after the show. So, absolutely.
There's that. And then I also wanted to mention one more thing. I'll just briefly mention it.
Yeah.
So grist.org, which is sort of an environmental news website, is putting on, or it's sponsoring, I'm not sure what the word is, they're sponsoring a climate fiction contest. And so people can contribute climate fiction to this. When's the deadline? I think the deadline is April 10th or something, April 12th. Anyone can submit. It doesn't, yeah, you got some time. Not too much, but you got some time. If you start now, you probably get something cool written. And it doesn't cost anything to submit. Okay, there it is, April 12th. So the idea of this project is to write a story that's set in sort of the next century, so after 2100. And it's about the fix. It's called The Fix. So it's not meant to be a dystopia. It's meant to be how are we doing things in the future that have helped to really address the problems of climate change.
It's funny that you say that, because as soon as you say climate fiction, I immediately think dystopia.
Right, that's what everybody thinks about. And so there's all sorts of, I mean, we'll talk about this once Lynn gets on the show, I'm sure. But there's all sorts of other aspects of climate fiction. And so this is intentionally saying, let's try and imagine something that's not just the typical dystopia, apocalyptic story. Let's think of something where we managed to do something right. And so this page in particular, they just announced the judges, I guess yesterday. And it's a really exciting list of judges. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this, check it out, because the judges even give some tips about, you know, these are some things that you could do to improve your storytelling.
Cool. So that's really awesome. Awesome. Well, as we get ready maybe to bring our guest on,
let's bring our guest on.
If you're just tuning in, you're watching the Sustainability Happy Hour. We're about to bring on our guest, Lynn Badia. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can comment and chat with us live. So pop something in that chat and it's going to show up here. And we'll try to answer as many questions or comments as we can. So if you've got any burning questions for Lynn, now's your option.
Yeah, but watch out. We might put your question on live, like if we see it.
Right. So make sure you use good, grammar, like punctuation.
It's okay. It's okay if you don't use good grammar.
All right, okay. Lynn, are you ready?
I think so. Should we just go for it?
Let's go for it.
Okay. Lynn?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you, but
we can't see you. You're a black square right now.
That's so strange. I haven't changed anything since our test.
What if I'm going to remove you and try to bring you back in. Unplug it, plug it back in. Remove. Add stream. Oh.
Are you there, Lynn?
I'm still here. And in fact,
how about this? How about you log out and then you reconnect? You click on that link and come back How about
Okay,
that?
we'll try that.
Okay, we'll try that. In the meantime, we'll just tell jokes.
Okay.
And by that, I mean Mike is going to tell jokes.
Oh, is that what's happening? Well, okay, so you want to know what was kind of funny is, for anyone interested in the back end of live streaming, below on my screen below, I could see Lynn's face waiting to be added to the screen, and she looked like she was there. But now that I'm thinking about it, she was kind of just like
Yeah, she was frozen
like
like the whole time. Kind of
and I was like, wow, you're sitting really still.
That's what I thought. I was like, I can't believe she can hold that pose. She's just like trained Zoom, like ready to go. Don't
Right,
move.
right.
Okay,
Oh,
let's see it.
Let's do it again.
My video is
Welcome.
on now. We're on.
We're good.
Okay.
Great.
Actually, I don't want to be on the top here, Mike. There we go. Okay.
Why do I have to be on the top?
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to
So-
be here. Thanks for having me.
So we sort of like keyed you up a little bit, or teed you up a little bit. But why don't you maybe introduce yourself and
Sure.
maybe just briefly say how you fit into like the CSU ecosystem?
Sure. So I'm a professor in the English department, but I have a very interdisciplinary background. My PhD work combined literary studies with a history, philosophy of science, and cultural studies. And so I focused on the question of energy in relation to culture really from the beginning of my PhD work. And so right after I finished that PhD, this field of energy humanities was really kind of really coming online in a way that was generating calls for postdocs and conferences. And so I did a 3-year postdoc in Canada doing research in this new field, this emerging field of energy humanities. So I came to CSU right after that, and since arriving here have created a bunch of new courses in the literature department that concern energy and climate and human-animal relationships, a whole host of different topics related to the environment. And I've also worked a lot with the Energy Institute. And so, you know, from the very beginning, began collaborating with them
Just to
on
chime
research.
in, the Energy Institute at CSU?
Yes, the CSU Energy
Okay.
Institute on the powerhouse campus, really just north of downtown Fort Collins, which is really great. So started working with them on research projects and building a new education abroad program on energy transitions, and specifically the cultural interdisciplinary sort of view of energy transition. So, and I more recently have been collaborating with people in SoGES, specifically around questions of climate.
Cool. Would you mind just kind of spelling out what are the energy humanities?
Sure. So I think it's kind of interesting. For a long time, energy was not a topic that was taken up in cultural studies and literary studies really directly. Of course, there were lots of people working on energy histories, and but this question of how energy relates to culture hadn't been foregrounded in a real way in the humanities. And so a group of researchers that began to really consolidate this question for the humanities were the ones who named it. It was named by a cultural studies professor and an anthropologist.
Hmm.
And they kind of had a lot of work that was speaking to one another and began collaborating and felt the need to sort of consolidate this question as a topic of research for the humanities. So thinking about energy not just as something that you study from the perspective of science and think of it as an engineering question, but also understand energy that's something that is cultural, social, and historical. So to think about how it relates to a number of questions that the humanities are really good at thinking about. And so it's as this field has emerged, there's been a lot of discussion about how, like, why has this not been a topic previously? This is now kind of, I think, common sense to us, to think that an energy transition involves all kinds of cultural questions. But, about 7 years ago, this was a new question to raise. And so that is what the energy humanities is kind of about. It's very interdisciplinary and really involves people from across the liberal arts fields, the social sciences, as well as the humanities, even though it's named humanities.
Yeah. Do you have maybe off the top of your head, like an example of a specific example of connecting energy to the humanities? Like I'm kind of thinking of, or to culture,
Yeah.
I mean. I'm kind of thinking maybe something in like transportation is like the culture of public transport and how we need to fuel that. Is that kind of what it is, or is that off base?
Yeah, I mean, actually, the study abroad program is maybe a good example of the one that, I've been creating and building through CSU. And, this program is really attempting to give students this, first of all, multinational perspective on energy transitions that are happening like in the current moment. And so we look at several different countries and try to figure out how the energy transition is playing out differently in different historical contexts. So how the individual history of a place like Colorado, how its specific geography is, a really interesting set of conditions that you have to consider when you're trying to transition to something like a renewable energy infrastructure. What are, the citizens of Colorado, what are their expectations around the energy grid? How do these things help shape the energy transition as it is sort of playing out in Colorado? And how is that really different than the energy transition that's playing out in Copenhagen, for instance? So this is one of the cities that we go to. So this is part of what that program is really trying to highlight, is that, these energy transitions are unfolding in the present moment, and they're absolutely dependent on the political histories of the places that they're happening, the specific geographies, the kind of, sort of cultural appetite for centralizing questions of sustainability within, everyday life. And so Copenhagen's just a really interesting example for that. I think when students from the US, kind of think about their home context and then go to Copenhagen and see how differently it feels there in terms of the sustainability agenda, it's striking. And, it's no longer a question of, oh yeah, this is a real cultural question that we have to, sort of attend to if we really want to think about transitioning to new energy systems.
Just on that note,
Yeah.
It's so one of the things, I mean, aside from the fact that you may have set like a CSU record for like the number of courses that were developed in such a short period of time, right? Like, isn't it something like 9 in like 3 or 4 years or something?
It's now, so I'm doing another one. It's like 10, it's like 11 in 4 years. It's a lot.
I really think that might be a record. But aside from that, so this idea of almost like the cultural specificity of some of these transitions, energy transitions. So there's like the geographic component, which you mentioned. There's the cultural appetite, the political appetite for that. But even in the United States, I mean, I think about how diverse that sort of appetite could be, right? And even just the geography of places. So Fort Collins is kind of like an enclave in some ways of a place that's has very aggressive climate policies and has set very ambitious targets. Okay. But Colorado is a really spread out place. And so we compare that to a place like, I don't know, Delaware or Rhode Island, a place that's intensely concentrated, it's suburban or urban for the most part. And so like the political entity itself lends itself much more conveniently to a transition in any way. So is this something that the energy humanities is able to take up, where they can engage in sort of that heterogeneity, like the different dimensions of how things can vary?
I think that's like the point in many ways
Oh, okay.
of energy humanities is
cool.
trying to attend to that cultural specificity. I mean, this is what's so interesting about Colorado too. I mean, we start the program by looking at Colorado. We spend a couple weeks. We go to NREL. I mean, the National Renewable Energy Lab is here.
Right.
And Colorado is interesting because it kind of has everything. I mean, you have this intense, sort of fossil fuel industry. You have the National Renewable Energy Lab. You have a kind of really, you have progressive, climate agendas and energy agendas in parts of the state. And then, you just, it's a really interesting landscape. And so
that's true.
I think as you've described it, I mean, this is part of the point of energy humanities is that, this isn't just a technical issue. This is absolutely a cultural issue in terms of how you make these things happen. There's not a one size sort of fits all, plan or solution here.
And I'm just curious to clarify, you talked about the study abroad program. I'm going to see if I can share my screen again. Let's see. Pat normally does this. You're very good at it.
There. That's mine. Here,
that's your screen.
I can remove my screen. Here, stop screen. Boom. Now there's only one screen to. Oh wait, I can do it. Add to stream. Right?
Yeah, that one.
Let's do it. No. Let's do. There we go. Boom. We figured it out.
This is kind of an older article now, but the Energy Transitions Education Abroad program, is this what you're referencing?
Yes, we are in Brussels in that photo.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, that was
awesome.
I mean, the program of course was supposed to run last summer, and of course it got canceled so many things. And so this was the first official year it ran, which was 2019. We missed 2020. We're missing 2021, so it'll run again in 2022
soon.
And where's the sign up to be saying, hey, if you need extra mentors or to go on
send me an email, Pat.
All right, done.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yes, it would. But so there's so much to talk about, and I think we need probably 3 or 4 shows to try and tackle everything. But another thing that you've worked on, we're pivoting right now. Another thing that you've worked on is something called climate realism. And this is something that I don't really understand. And so I wanted to talk with you about it. Maybe we could work through some of the words and try and get through that. But there's a quote here. Climate realism intervenes by naming and exploring emergent aesthetic practices and the conceptual project of knowing and mediating the various forces embedded in climate. There's a lot there.
Unpack, yes.
Unpack. But the first thing I wanted to start with was, so climate realism intervenes by naming and exploring emergent aesthetic practices. What's an aesthetic practice? Okay.
There's a couple ways I can maybe unpack this. Thinking about the aesthetic practices is really just a way of sort of foregrounding that when we represent something as complex as climate, there are a number of formal choices that are being made, no matter how you attempt to present something as complex as climate. And those formal choices, what is the site you're narrating from? What is the, sort of narrative framing or the perspective framing? Whose perspective is that? What perspectives are obscured? All of those choices of representation are not value free, right? They are related to a host of, kind of values and concerns that are maybe not represented on the surface of the representation or the narrative, but are acting in many ways. And so
in the idea of, say, like a climate scientist, okay, somebody whose daily job is to model the climate, let's say.
Yep.
Can you unpack is there an aesthetic practice in that?
Of course.
Can you? But so this is something where I'm coming at this from almost total ignorance. So I'm wondering how could we name the aesthetic practice of something that almost goes without saying, right? Oh, I'm a climate modeler. And how much do we take for granted when somebody says that?
So I can explain this term of climate realism a bit more too, and how we arrived at it.
Sure.
But I think two contributors to the climate realism book come to mind immediately when you ask this question, because they speak exactly to this question about sort of objective realism and how that is one type of realism. And, so for instance, one of our contributors is Kyle White. He's a distinguished professor at University of Michigan. He's concerned with environmental justice. He's an indigenous member of the, I think, Potawatomi Nation. So for instance, in his chapter, he makes this distinction between climate realism and objective realism, scientific realism, and indigenous realism. And so he compares how scientific assessments and case studies about projections of climate change with temperature rises, increased frequency of extreme events is one way to represent the climate crisis. And he contrasts this to indigenous realism, and indigenous realism in his definition and how he discusses it in relation to climate change highlights the kind of systems of power connected to climate change and colonialist histories connected to climate change. And so he, kind of presents this more historical, cultural way of thinking about climate change. And, he argues then that that's more conducive to addressing the kind of critical problems that have caused climate change. And so, that's one example of, in the book, these, kind of comparisons that we think of, and this is, where this questioning of this term realism comes from, how we've chosen that title. It's a provocation. We're not sort of suggesting there's something called climate realism. It's a provocation more than anything. But several of the chapters in the book sort of engage with exactly your question about how can we multiply and expand what we think of as, our realistic ways, our objective ways of knowing climate change. So that's one example that comes to mind.
That's a great explanation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I have us take an even bigger step back?
Yeah.
What is realism in a literary sense?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I can explain, why we put climate next to realism for the book, and kind of presented this as a topic for some examination. So this book really started with a series of conversations between myself and my two co-authors, Jeff Diamati and Maria Setnich. And we began noticing a few things. This started in 2016 is when we started this project. One, that climate had become, among many things, a representational concern. So how do you represent climate in an era of climate change when climate not only sort of references dynamics of weather and atmospheric patterns, but it also indexes human activity and human history. So the fuels we use, our agriculture, etc. And so that was the kind of first complication, is that to represent something like climate, it's now really complex. It's not just about, the weather patterns in isolation. This is like the Anthropocene insight, right? And second, we noticed that there was this kind of proliferation in ideas of realism. So indigenous realism, speculative realism, political realism. And so there's this interesting turn to this idea of realism, at the same time that there's this, interest in expanding how we've understood climate. So we kind of formulated this idea of climate realism as a provocation. We weren't proposing a new theory. And so what happens when you put this new complicated understanding of climate as a kind of nature culture in conversation with an idea of realism, which has a long intellectual history of being associated with like an objective rendering of nature. Is that possible? How do we represent climate? And so that's kind of how the project started. It was really that question.
You just used a phrase, nature culture.
Oh yeah,
that's that's okay.
Yeah.
No, but that's okay. And that I was gonna bring up Donna Harway.
Yep.
And this idea of like the history of consciousness, the idea that the work that she's done in provoking and sort of poking at the idea of especially the Anthropocene and how we almost take it for granted. There's a lot of things baked into this notion of the Anthropocene, the era of human change,
right.
That we take for granted, that it's inevitable, that everybody agrees, that everybody is causing it, that it's sort of this homogenous push. And so Donna Harway, who's I think a professor at UC Santa Cruz, I want to say.
She's really interesting. I mean, she initially got, I think, her PhD in biology in Colorado, and
is that right?
Yeah, and began working in more theoretical.
Exactly.
Yeah, departments. I think she's part of. I shouldn't say. I'm not sure where she.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But what she's done, I mean, her whole career is really provoking and exploring and challenging these prevailing concepts in it. And in the last probably decade, she and a lot of other of her colleagues have done a really effective job of challenging the notion of the Anthropocene, that it's not just like all of humanity causing this collectively at the same time. No, there are specific channels of power that could actually be more responsible while others might be less. And this feels almost like it mirrors that. And then when you said nature culture, I was like, aha, does that mean this work that you're doing is sort of in dialogue with this other work that's challenging the notion of the Anthropocene?
Some of it absolutely is.
Okay.
And this is where you get the proliferation of these terms like capitalocene, plasticene, plantationocene, where, these people are trying to highlight that the anthropos, the human, that it has to be more specific than a blanket sort of, attribution of responsibility. It's not all humans, it's capitalism. It's not all humans, it's the logic of the plantation, and so that's where, some of these alternative suggestions for renaming the epic come from, is, really calling into question the blanket responsibility that's implied by Anthropocene. Yeah.
So another question on this idea of, like you brought up the example of Kyle White's chapter and how you can look at climate in lots of different ways. And I mean, in some ways to me, like climate it's left the dock. There are policies being made around specific notions of what it means, about perceptions of like, these are the problems. These are the sets of solutions that are available. We're not talking about some of this other stuff. And so how much space do you feel like, especially because I know you're involved with the Energy Institute, which is a very like policy wonkish, policy-oriented organization on campus.
Engineering organization. Yeah.
Engineering organization. Yeah. So somebody coming from like the almost like critical humanities perspective, how do you see yourself engaging in that? I won't name names at the Energy Institute, but there's a lot of engineers that are very much like, let's come up with this, and we're going to change this wheel diameter, and then we're going to build this dam. And I'm not trying to diminish that, but it's a very material like perception of the world. So how do you, coming in with like almost these mind expanding ideas, come into dialogue with somebody who's just like, give me some graph paper, Like, how do you do that?
Hey, I love graph paper.
I do too, actually.
We can all love graph paper. Sorry, I shouldn't be graph paper.
Stop hating on graph paper, Pat.
Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry, graph paper. I'm gonna get some nasty graph paper comments in here.
I mean, this is the challenge of interdisciplinarity, right? How do you bridge some of these disciplinary divides? And my collaborations there started, I almost as soon as I arrived on campus. And so this is, almost 4 years into building relationships. And like anything, it's, a process of communication and co-learning and time. And so I think the study abroad program, actually building that program, opened the conversation in a really big way, because when we were doing the research for that program, a lot of people from the Energy Institute were involved. And I think the insights that kind of came out of that program after going to somewhere like Copenhagen and realizing how different the culture around these questions actually is there. There was I think, progressive broadening of the sets of concerns that were being included under the powerhouse roof. And so I think how do you bridge those things? I think it's building relationships, working on projects together, learning each other's disciplinary language as much as possible. But it does take time. It's not quick.
Right. I mean, in the midst of all of that, did you try and almost impose some methods of knowledge sharing or like jargon sharing even? You know what I mean? Like, did you not impose, but like, did you say like, hey, let's all read these different like papers together, or let's all read this article, I don't know, in the Atlantic, and then we can talk? I don't know. Like, are there platforms that you found that were more fruitful than others for fostering that sort of interdisciplinary collaboration?
We didn't do anything formal like that, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of interesting. I think it was
totally, actually.
I think it was a matter of realizing what value could be added to the discussion by broadening the conversation. Honestly, I can't point to any one moment or one sort of strategy that enabled that to work as well as it has. I kind of feel like working on a project with others together is how it was really working on the study abroad program, because that took a year to build. I mean, it took a long time. Yeah. And so that gave us something to focus on and bring our different perspectives to, and sort of do some active learning with one another as we built it. It did take,
That's perfect.
Yeah. And I think Brian Wilson gets a lot of credit for taking the chance of doing this kind of experimental, research project with someone like me who, has never worked with somebody in like critical humanities before and was willing to try it out. It took some, I think, willingness for uncertainty and experimentation that was there, before I arrived, that allowed this to sort of move forward in a way.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that advice. We just have to do more projects with other groups of people, I suppose. Yeah. I think my dog sees a chihuahua on the trail right now. We get some loud barks here. Okay, so Micah, do you mind if I try pivoting to?
Go for it.
Okay, so before I do that though, we're here at the SoGES Sustainability Happy Hour with our guest, Dr. Lynn Badia. We've talked about a lot of things now. What would you say is your like 3-word, what you do? What do you study?
3 words only.
3, yeah.
3 words. Oh my goodness.
Well, maybe more than 3.
Okay, fine. You can have 4.
Oh my goodness. 3 words of what I do. I'd say, I think you kind of said it well. Like a critical humanities perspective on environment and energy.
Perfect.
I don't know if that clarifies anything.
That's okay. But what I wanted to pivot to is the fact that you did something last semester, which I wish I could have done, which is you taught a climate fiction class.
Yes.
And so to me, I'm a huge sci-fi nerd.
Yeah.
But I also am really interested in the genre of climate fiction and what it, broadly speaking, right? Like that's a huge genre of books.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we could run down our like top 10 lists of climate fiction or whatever right now, but maybe we could go a little bit deeper though and say, what do you think climate fiction is doing in the space of advancing like almost like a perpendicular dialogue into this discussion of climate? Like, what is climate fiction? What can it do? What's like the best, what is like an opportunity for climate fiction to contribute towards advancing this broadening or expanding of the dialogue around how we perceive the problems of climate change?
That's a great question. And I'll say
before we dig into this, I want to invite our audience to write their favorite climate fiction book in the chat.
Do it. Otherwise, I'm just going to start listing them all myself.
Think of it. Okay, go.
Okay, so climate fiction. So this is this emerging genre of fiction, and it's related to a number of modes of speculative fiction. So like science fiction, scenario fiction. There's a whole sort of interesting flourishing that's happening across the kind of like speculative fiction genres, both in their production. There's a lot of new writing happening, but also, in their scholarly and kind of popular interest. And I think this renewed interest in like speculative literature is happening for a couple of reasons. So one, we're experiencing these like, very deep existential uncertainties about the not too distant future, especially related to climate. So there's this impulse to try to imagine our way into that uncertainty. I think alongside that, there is this felt need to reimagine our modes of life. So how we live on the earth, how we imagine community in general, how we can dismantle and reorganize systems of power and oppression. And so I think speculative fiction is kind of providing a very interesting space for that intellectual and cultural work to take place. And this is really what was at the heart, Pat, of your visit to my climate fiction class as part of this workshop, asking the students to kind of write their own piece of climate fiction. So, that was a pretty great engagement for you to come to the class and talk about speculative fiction scenarios with them.
Right. Yeah. Just the context is I provided a lecture about world building in Lynn's class, and how do we kind of go about that process of imagining strange different worlds that are different from our own. We've got a question from somebody named Micah Bennett. Add this in here.
I'm back.
Climate fiction or pandemic fiction. Are you familiar with that title, Lynn?
Wait, I'm sorry. What was pandemic fiction?
And so does Station 11 count as climate fiction or pandemic fiction?
There's a number of like these really interesting kind of genre mashups that's happening, where you're getting like the other one. So we read in the climate fiction class the Junot Diaz short story Monstro. I don't know if people are familiar with this, but it takes place in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It's brilliant. It was initially published in the New Yorker, and it is this like amazing.
What's it called?
Monstro.
Monstro. Okay, we'll make sure we have a link to that in our notes. So it takes place in the Dominican Republic, and it combines like zombie fiction, pandemic fiction, climate fiction, sort of all in one. And you can't really tease those apart. It's this, and so, there are a number of stories that, and in the same way, the story could also be understood as like a piece of realist fiction. The style of it is very, sort of detailed, and you get a lot of sensory kind of experience of what the characters are going through. And so I hate to, I don't think it's one or the other. A lot of these genres are, doing this speculative futurist work are kind of really playing with genre in an interesting way. So wait a second, did Station 11 come up with Erica Osborne? Is that where we talked about that book?
Oh, that is where we talked about that book. And I
read
it. I just read it over this last holiday season.
Yeah. It's good, isn't it? It's a really good book.
It's good. And I think if I had read it before the actual pandemic that we're in, and my mom read it before then, and she's like, yeah, I just thought it was like too out there. It was too weird. And then like rereading it after an actual pandemic, during a pandemic, I was like, interesting.
This was what was so strange about teaching this text too. I mean, I created this syllabus for the climate fiction class before the pandemic, and then I was teaching it right in the middle of the pandemic. And it was a very strange experience to read something like Monstro, like in the heart of, this uncertain pandemic, and it's pandemic fiction in a lot of ways. And that kept happening throughout the climate fiction class. Like there's a, story about extreme fires, and we're in Colorado experiencing an extreme fire. And so it's a strange experience to teach climate fiction.
Okay, so I wanted to revisit, oh, you brought that up already?
Yeah, we've got a comment here by Mary C. Hill. She's actually a current SoGES visiting fellow. Are there any climate fiction books that present a future that has advantages over what society is like now? Thanks for commenting, Mary.
Wow.
I've got one in mind.
Advantages. Yeah, tell us, Pat.
So I thought Kim Stanley Robinson wrote a book, New York 2140.
2140.
So that's, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago he wrote that. And it's essentially, it takes place in 2140 after dramatic sea level rise has happened. So that's a disadvantage, right? Like profound sea level rise, not a great thing. But there are aspects of that society where they've come up with other ways, other kind of social commons when it comes to housing, when it comes to the rights of certain individuals that are quite a bit different, especially in big cities sometimes, where you have almost like 2 classes of citizenship where you've got renters and owners. And so it was definitely an interesting exploration of flipping the script and seeing how the future might be better after a lot of bad stuff happens, that there could be opportunities for kind of creating something from that chaos that's actually maybe a little bit better than things are now. So that was a surprising one for me, at least.
Yeah, I think because it's hard when you think of climate fiction, you're often thinking of dystopian fictions.
Absolutely.
But I think there's a lot of them that on the surface feel very dystopian, but are also, like N.K. Jemison's work, rethinking gender, rethinking power dynamics in a productive way at the same time. And so, it's, you'd be kind of hard pressed, I think, to find like a real optimistic, but I think that a lot of these texts are rethinking all kinds of social structures, how we think about community in ways that is very productive.
Yeah. I mean, another one also that comes to mind, Mary, is the other very recent Kim Stanley Robinson book, Ministry of the Future. I can never remember if it's of or for, but that's essentially, it's almost like charting a course for what are the kind of policy things that could happen in the next 30 or 40 years that would maybe steer us towards a course that was managing the climate and the Earth system in a way that avoided sort of the worst consequences of climate change, the worst sort of projections. And in some ways that's sort of hopeful, and it gets at some of these questions of inequity. It gets at questions of wealth accumulation by the extreme wealthy, and 50 or 90% of the population that almost has equivalent wealth to that very high category of wealth. So, I mean, there's other ways that it's not always sometimes the Earth system is going to be hosed no matter what, but then there are other aspects of the social and economic systems that can sometimes be depicted in other ways. I wanted to plug in Randall Barnes said Earth by David Brin in 1990. I don't think I've actually read that one.
I haven't either.
So
I'm gonna write this down.
I'm sorry, Randall, but that's on my list now. And I'll make sure that we get that. We'll include all of these on a list, and maybe I'll even editorialize a little bit and add a bunch that I like.
I can add a big list too to the chat.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're getting close to the end of our.
We are. That happens every time.
It was fast.
It happens every time. It was fast, and I feel like we could keep talking about a lot of this stuff for a lot longer. Is there any last thing that you want to maybe talk about or share, something you're working on right now, or that we didn't have a chance to cover?
I'm working on this book about free energy, which I've been writing for a while. I'm happy to talk about that. Climate is a big, topic in my research, but I write a lot about energy as well. So I'm happy to talk about that if that's interesting.
Yeah,
sure.
Go for it.
So this is a book I've been working on for a while. It's called Imagining Free Energy, Fantasies, Utopias, and Critiques of America. It's kind of a long title, but it really foregrounds this question of the relationship between energy infrastructures and how we envision society. So it really looks at how we've imagined the possibility of unlimited energy. And this goes back to the early industrial period in the 1800s, and how that has been connected to different forms of imagining society, right? So again, this idea of free energy is intentionally kind of paradoxical, but it connects like these speculative narratives about super abundant energy to how we've imagined American society over the past 2 centuries. And so that's looking at these free energy narratives in relation to politics, to social planning, and to a whole host of cultural questions.
So just to connect with that, does the kind of emerging narrative around like the momentum of renewable energy, so the idea that like wind and solar are economically, they're becoming a lot more feasible, and it's becoming less feasible for fossil fuels. And then wind and solar have, at least to me, they have this almost perception of being free energy, or as much as you could want in a way. Does that reflect sort of an evolution of thinking on free energy, or is that just sort of yet another example? Or
that is yet another example. I mean, this goes back to like Henry David Thoreau, really critiquing these proposals for these free energy utopias in the 1830s. That's where the book starts. And so I kind of look at how this has functioned as a kind of problematic narrative in times of energy transition. And these narratives can somewhat at times reinforce this kind of conceptual divide between nature and society. And so, you know, there's an issue when you begin reassembling the world around the possibility of a free energy source, that it then just kind of disconnects sort of our relationship to energy and different types of ecosystems from how we're imagining how we live. And so, the one that I look at really closely in the book is this whole discourse around fusion energy, which has been a really interesting.
I hear it's only a decade away.
It's only a decade away, forever a decade away. So there, you know, it's the problem when you think you can kind of just plug a new energy source into the existing infrastructure, and that's, you know, sort of all we need to do to change, you know, in terms of how we're living. And that's often where these narratives kind of go, and how they become problematic in my argument.
Okay, well, we're going to look for that. No rush. It's okay. These things take time. But we've been at, so it's 2021. We asked a question all during 2020 of our guests.
The same question for every guest.
The same question for every guest that was sort of pandemic oriented. And we're pivoting away from that with the hope that, you know, we see maybe at the end of a very distant tunnel that the pandemic might be nearing an end. And so the question we're asking this year is, I'm going to get it wrong. What are you hopeful about? So what is something that's maybe giving you hope right now? It doesn't have to be related to your work. It doesn't have to be related to your job.
But it can be.
It can be, yeah, totally.
But it can also be something, you know, personal life. Yeah. What are you hopeful about?
You know, so much of the work I do depends on collaboration. You know, like the Climate Realism book, you know, that started with bringing all of our co-authors together so we can think through what this provocation of, you know, climate realism means. And that was such a privilege to be able to do that. And so, you know, just the thought of being able to collaborate with people, again, in, you know, in place, in direct conversation is a really nice thing to think about.
Yeah, that does sound pretty good.
So I'm excited to have that possibility open up again.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
I am too.
That's a good one. To be able to, you know, run the study abroad program again.
Yeah.
All of those things. Yeah. Okay, well, Lynn, it's been fantastic to have you as a guest. I'm certain that we're going to want to have you back on the show in the not too distant future. This has been great.
Thank you both so much.
So-
It's
Yeah,
been a
thank you,
pleasure.
Lynn.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna say goodbye to Lynn. Bye, Lynn. And before we let you all get to your very snowy weekend, I've
Oof.
got a few.
Yeah.
I've just got a few SoGES items. Are you ready for them,
Yes.
Pat?
Wait, am I supposed to have these queued up?
No, I will.
Okay.
Oh, except
all
for
right.
I accidentally logged myself out. So let's see if I can do it again.
If you can, I can do it.
I think I got it.
Okay.
Oh no.
Man, we're going deep into the tunnel here. This is
no.
like,
Stop share.
this is SoGES Happy Hour reception here, I think.
Let's see. That's like on when your old school computer has like an error and it's like choo 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 and it's got that box. Should we try again? Should I try stop share screen? I've got this fancy mouse that's got
Like
a lot of
7
buttons. And
Yeah.
that's how I got myself logged out. Here we go. Woo.
Okay.
All right. Couple of SoGES things that are happening. First of all, the deadline for the Sustainability Leadership Fellows program is coming up. It's on Monday. So good thing you're not going anywhere this weekend because you're going to have time to finish your application to the leadership program. This is a Sustainability Leadership and Communications training program for advanced PhD students and postdocs at CSU.
Yep.
So that's at sustainability.colostate.edu/SLF application. We have another Managing the Planet, a virtual Managing the Planet coming up pretty soon here on March.
And just to explain, Managing the Planet is the panel series that SoGES runs. Typically, it's at a local bar, but it's obviously the last 12 months we haven't been able to do that. So they're all virtual now.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to explain what it was.
Yeah, which is great. So this one is Planning for Climate Change, Lessons from the Dust Bowl. And we have got a really good panel. We're going to have Becky Bollinger of the Department of Atmospheric Science in the Colorado Climate Center. We're going to have Alan Knapp from Biology and the Graduate Degree Program in Ecology. We're going to have our own Sue Ellen Melzer, who is with the Department of Soil and Crop Sciences, as well as the School of Global Environmental Sustainability, and Douglas Shefflin from the Department of History. So that is March 25th. It's free to attend. You do just need to register to get that Zoom link.
Yeah.
And then, as always, sign up for updates. Get emails from me. I'll send them to your inbox, and you'll get reminded about when the Sustainability Happy Hour is and who's going to be on the next show.
And I can vouch for the fact I'm on the list. I don't send the emails, and I can vouch for the fact that you don't get very many emails. You essentially get 2 per show. The first one is like a week ahead of time, and then the second one like 10 minutes
just a
ahead
reminder.
of time.
Yeah.
Just to remind you. And
then, so many things. We have 2 new videos out.
Oh, cool.
Which is really exciting. We've started creating these sustainability spotlight videos with some of our SoGES affiliates. And so if you've ever wondered who Johnny Plastini is,
I've wondered.
There is a video all about him and his work. He links the arts and sciences together and uses the power of visual communication to help people understand topics related to sustainability. That's on our YouTube channel and our Facebook channel. So go watch that. It's about 3 minutes long. And then this one is brand new as of 10 a.m. this morning. Another current SoGES resident fellow, Ed Hall. And this is another really fun video. He is a associate professor in the Department of Ecosystem Science and Sustainability. And he works, he does a lot of interdisciplinary work, but with watersheds and microbes. And yeah, I made these videos. It was really fun to film and work with both of these guys. So make sure you go check these out.
I haven't seen Ed obviously in a long time. His hair is so long. That's great.
It's great.
That's great. Okay. Gotta go check the videos out.
Yep. Check those out. I think that's all I've got for you today.
And we got a guest 2 weeks from now.
We do.
Right?
We do. Yep. Ode Shaznais is a visiting fellow with SoGES. And she is going to talk with us about I'm going to forget the name of it. The Native Lands Food Transition Systems Index. It's a really cool project, and we'll queue that up. And you can also find information about that in the SoGES calendar and if you sign up for our emails. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, stay safe this weekend.
Yep, that sounds great. Thanks to everyone. Yes, thanks to everyone who commented. And
yes, thank you.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.